Well, the first thing we want to talk about is the top 10 most disappointing players so far this year. And the driving question, of course, we don't want to dog on players, but it's whether these guys are going to turn it around. We see guys every year that start off the season kind of slow and they get back to their normal area. But we've also seen guys that will sometimes just have uncharacteristically pretty bad seasons. And we're about a quarter of the way through the MLB season so far, and these guys are not off to the hottest start. Who do you want to start with?
Starting off with Alek Manoah, who was a top 3 finisher in Cy Young voting last year. And it was a guy, he's under 25, was looking to be the future of the front end of the Blue Jays rotation. And it has just not gone well for him so far. 4.83 ERA with a 5.75 FIP, which means that that ERA number might be better than what it should be with the FIP. And 41 innings pitched, and it's just really been kind of surprising to see him there. Kind of what's the story behind that? What do you think?
I don't know. I mean, you take a look at some of the other stats as well, and with pitchers, sometimes the expected stats, it's harder to really tell whether they actually mean something. But Manoah is a guy that a lot of people last year said overperformed his expected stats, and this season his expected stats are even worse than his already poor. You mentioned 4.83 ERA, but his K per 9 is down to just around 7 batters per 9 innings, which would be a career worst, and his walks per 9 up to 5.5 batters for an entire game, which would also be a career worst. So simply put, he's not striking guys out. He's walking too many guys. He's getting hit hard a little bit more this year. You look at his Baseball Savant page. All these numbers are below the 20th percentile among all major league pitchers. Expected ERA, expected batting average against, expected slug against, K percentage, walk percentage, whiff percentage. Not getting swing and misses, still getting hit pretty hard, and guys should be, at least according to the expected batting average and slug, hitting the ball a lot against him and hitting it for extra base hits.
And it does make sense that his FIP is a little bit worse than his ERA, because seeing the Blue Jays, they have some great defenders out there. They got Varsho and Kiermaier, so to pair with Artie Springer in the outfield, those are some 3 great outfield gloves. And so when you're pitching to a 4.83 ERA, when your defense is going to help you out that much, it's really kind of just speaks to that you're not pitching well. And like I said, it's a guy who at least I thought was kind of the future of that Blue Jays rotation. I know you said he outpitches expecting a little bit, and that's a little bit because of the defense and just
he seemed to people seem to believe he stepped up in the big moments. Even he would let runners on, but then he wouldn't let them in. And sometimes people call that clutch, but the people that follow the analytics would say eventually that's going to come back down to earth. I mean, his ERA last year was a full run lower than his expected ERA. And you mentioned third in the Cy Young voting. I think a lot of fans can be endeared by a clutch player, but this is one that I think the analytics community will look at and say, hey, we were right on this guy. He might have had a good 2022, but in 2023, I think you're seeing a little bit more of what Manoah is. Would you agree with that? Do you think he can bounce back, or are you, do you think he's going to be more clutch down the stretch?
I definitely understand what you're saying. And it kind of got the vibe that he just had that dog in him. And he was dominant in those big moments, and he would come off the mound, show emotion, and that's kind of what the fans saw. And it kind of leads you to believe that he's just a guy that's what happens. He gets out of those big scenarios. But like you said, some guys have that dog in them, and some guys maybe just get lucky and think they have that dog in them. So we'll see what it means for Manoah down the stretch, if he can kind of figure this out. It could just be, a regular slump. Like you said, he's a young pitcher. Maybe he pitched really well last year. Teams are starting to figure him out a little bit more. Maybe he has to adjust now. But whatever it is, he's been disappointing this season.
Yeah, I think he'll bounce back a little bit more. I mean, you have a guy like Manoah. There's clearly talent there. Sometimes you look at teams that come out of a rebuild a little too early. Sometimes young players can get themselves into some situations early on in their career, and they really dominate, and they're expected to do that all the time. I mean, being under 25 years old and being an ace of a team that is you picked to go and win the World Series or lose,
be in the World Series.
Be in the World Series. I mean, that's a hard thing to do. So sometimes you get swept up in that. You still mentioned it's only around 8 starts for Manoah so far this year. He's still going out there pitching every 5 days. And with a guy this young, you want to believe that he can bounce back. But some of these numbers, they aren't the most. I don't know how to put it, but they don't make you super excited about the rest of the season for Manoah. But I do think the talent will eventually win out. I traded for him in fantasy baseball and gave up Wander Franco, which is not looking to be a good trade so far this season. But I think Alek Manoah can turn it around. Maybe he's not going to finish in the top 3 of the Cy Young again, but I certainly think that he's too talented and too young to let this go to waste. The second player we want to talk about is Jose Abreu, the new Houston Astros, signed a near $60 million deal in the offseason. It has not been pretty for him so far. He's got a .213 batting average, an OPS that is just above 500 with a full -1 WAR. He's one of 2 qualified hitters that has not hit a home run this year. What's been the problem with Jose Abreu?
It's really just shocking to see. The guy went 3 years removed now from an MVP in the shortened season, and it's really been the power numbers that have struggled. Like I said, didn't hit a home run. He's a guy who kind of made a name for himself on the long ball. So it's really just kind of shocking to see all around. It's a team in the Astros that are struggling, and it's interesting to see if he can figure it out. Maybe it's being with the White Sox for so long, having to figure it out with the Astros. Whatever it is, the Astros kind of are needed him to turn it around.
Yeah, I mean, it is hard. You do mention some players struggle moving from league to league, but also if you're with one team for so long, it can be hard to bounce back, and you're learning, a new coaching staff, a new department, a new batting cages, new spring training facility. It's all different. So a guy like Jose Abreu, a veteran, probably used to the same routine every offseason with Chicago. Maybe things are changing around a little bit, but he's tied for the second lowest WRC plus among all qualified hitters in baseball. This is a guy that this offseason, while a lot of people in previous offseasons have said Jose Abreu is overrated, I thought he was a little bit underrated coming into this year because he had one of his best seasons of his career. I would say probably a top 3 season of his entire career last year. So thought he was kind of more on that underrated side now. He's proving me wrong by having just an abysmal start to the year. Do you think he can turn it around, or is this a kind of one of those scenarios where we see a player have the wheels fall off a little bit down the stretch of their career?
I think he can definitely turn it around. And I mean, like you said, he's switching to a new team late in his career. So, I mean, it could be kind of a combination of just regression, getting older, as well as learning that new team. But I think there's got to be some sort of positive regression for him, whether that be just learning how to hit without some power, whether the power is because of that switch or because of the age. Eventually, the power kind of leaves you as you get older, and so it's coming at a bad time for Jose Abreu and the Astros. That is, so I think he'll turn around. Whether that be finding his power again and hitting more long balls, or kind of reinventing himself as a hitter. I think he's kind of too good of a pure hitter to not figure it out, and I think he'll turn it around.
Well, some righties too, instead of like finding more power, all you have to do is find a way to direct your power when you're an Astro. If you hit it towards the Crawford box, it's probably the easiest place for a right-hander to hit a home run in the big league. So if he could just find a way to maybe redirect his power to left field, that could be a way to try and figure out some home runs. But Jose Abreu feels like too crafty of a veteran to have this bad of a season. Maybe he's not going to be an MVP contender or have one of the best seasons of his career, but he's going to be an above league average hitter, you would have to assume, for the rest of the season, or else for the Astros, you just paid him $60 million over 3 years. So you would hope that he's able to bounce back and be at least a above league average hitter.
Absolutely. Like we said, the Astros need it. And moving on to another team that's kind of struggling and needs some production, it's the Mets, and next disappointing player, Starling Marte, who just been frankly bad this season. A .224 batting average with a 67 WRC plus. He's got a lower slug than on base percentage, so his on base percentage is also only .292. So he's barely getting on base, not hitting for much power. It's just the only thing is when he gets on base, he's able to steal bases. And so that's really the only value he's providing for the Mets right now, at least on the offensive side of the ball.
Yeah, just 5 extra base hits for Marte this season. He's got 1 homer and 4 doubles. I mean, that's it. Like, I know that Marte is one of those players where if you hit a single, sometimes it's basically a double because he can steal. And he does have the 9 stolen bags, but he's advertised as a player that will get on base, he'll steal an extra bag, he'll play great defense for you, and sometimes he'll walk into some power, be around that 20 home run a year mark. But right now, only 1 homer on the season, not many extra base hits, only the other 4 doubles. So with Marte, he's just not the player that I think the Mets thought they were signing a couple of years ago. And you talk about the defense, which is supposed to be his saving grace if he's not hitting the ball. He's 15th percentile on outs above average. So he's been a very poor defender for New York this year. One of the big reasons that their offense has not been playing as well as many expected it to be, they're paying him a lot of money to be putting up a 67 WRC plus, which is bottom 10 among all qualified hitters in baseball.
Yeah, and we're going to be talking about the Mets, the offense as a whole, a little bit later in this episode if you're listening on podcasts, and another video if you're on YouTube. But it's a team as a whole that's struggling on offense, like you mentioned, and they kind of need him. And he was a guy who performed last season in 136 WRC plus in 118 games and in a 101 win season for the Mets. And for a team that's struggling across the board, frankly, on the offensive side of the ball, they've definitely had their struggles there. It's a guy they need to turn it around.
Yeah, I think he will. I'm not saying he's going to walk into more power and get all the way, maybe above 20 home runs. But I think he's a guy that you're going to see him at least be the kind of player that you expect from Starling Marte. I think the defense can pick it up. He's obviously going to steal you bases. You just need him to get on base more and hit more doubles and triples. If he's not hitting home runs, he has to be hitting other extra base hits. Otherwise, you just can't have him in the middle of that lineup. And, Francisco Lindor's been struggling a little bit. There's some other hitters on the Mets that we're going to get into in our other discussion about them specifically. They need a guy like Starling Marte to step up and be that 120 to 130 WRC plus hitter that we know he can be. I think he bounces back probably, but he's definitely been one of the most disappointing baseball players this season in Major League Baseball. Let's go to the second pitcher on today's list. That's Nick Lodolo of the Cincinnati Reds. 7 starts for the Cincinnati Red. He's got 34 and a third innings pitched, a 6.29 ERA. It's been kind of a Jekyll and Hyde season for him so far. Really good start. He's been really poor since.
Yeah, he started off with 3 good starts, 2.12 ERA through 17 innings pitched, and had a 7 innings shutout game in there, and then 4 bad starts. And now he hits the IL with a calf injury. So it kind of makes you wonder, maybe was something lingering, maybe he was hurt, but it was a guy who was hyped up going into this year as a potential breakout pitcher and leading the front end of that rotation, something to look forward to for the Reds. And now you kind of string a few bad starts together. The ERA is now at 6.29, so it's something that's a struggle for the TCU Horned Frog, but it's something that is a question mark for the Red starter. And do you think it's partly injury, or is he maybe just not what we originally thought?
It is hard. We're never going to know whether it's injury or not until he comes out and maybe says it after coming back from the IL, but it's disappointing for sure, but it's not completely out of the realm of what we thought could happen, specifically just because of the way things work with Cincinnati pitchers. I mean, you're pitching in Great American Ballpark, which is outside of Coors Field, probably the easiest park for hitters to hit in. You can even argue first because it's so small. I mean, Coors has a big outfield at least, but Great American Ballpark, a tiny bandbox field, you're pitching there as a home pitcher, you're getting screwed by your own home field because you give up home runs, you can give up, easy doubles off the wall. And for Lodolo, if pitching at home is not a great place for you to throw, you can end up with a balloon ERA. And I think you will see more volatile starts, or maybe he's got one good start and the next one's a blow-up start. And you've seen similar things with Hunter Green, 2 guys that are already young, so they're going to be volatile in general. I mean, it's disappointing, but I don't think it's all that surprising. This was in the realm of possibilities to start the season. I don't think that he is not what we thought he was going to be, but I think that this is something that can happen. Unfortunately, it did happen to him, and we hope that he can have a speedy recovery.
And Lodolo is a little bit different than the guys who we previously mentioned on this list so far. The other guys being Marte, Abreu, and Manoah are guys that have shown that they can perform. And whereas Lodolo, it was a guy who's shown flashes and someone we were expecting to perform well, and that's kind of still what we're seeing here. He showed those flashes in the first 3 starts of what we thought he could be, but now with the 4 starts struggling, it's kind of, okay, maybe it's not his time yet, rather than the other guys who have been disappointing because they're expected to do better. This one is also expected to do better, but kind of from a prediction standpoint. So you cut him a little bit of slack there, and maybe it's just not his time yet, and he needs a little bit more time to get used to everything. So maybe that could be a problem, whether it's injury, whether it's that. Something we'll see when he comes back from injury. And still think he's obviously a young player who has some better days ahead of him.
Yeah, I think it is disappointing, though, because there wasn't really a breakout pick that we were both more in congruence on, an agreement on. We were both saying, I think Nick Lodolo can be this, and you're like, oh, I was going to say he was going to be this, and we were both trying to one-up each other on how good we thought that Lodolo and Hunter Green could be. And so just disappointing when you see those guys not off to the greatest start, especially we saw the flash. We know what Nick Lodolo can be, Then unfortunately he ran into those bad starts. So I think over the course of his career, he'll be fine. This year, if he's still pitching in Cincinnati, this is always a possibility, and sometimes it's hard to bring that ERA down. So hopefully when he comes off the IL, which we hope will be soon, we can see him bounce back. But I'm not as sold on him being. I think I said that one of the two Reds pitchers is going to be top 5 in the NL Cy Young voting. Not exactly sure I believe in that one anymore.
Yeah, I mean, that's the one you one-upped me on. I had one of the Reds being receiving Cy Young votes, and I picked Lodolo in fantasy in our Dynasty League, so there's still some hope there. But like you said, not off the start that I wanted. But moving on to our next player, now it's Andrew Benintendi of the Chicago White Sox, who was given the biggest contract in White Sox history going into the season, which kind of surprised me a little bit. I thought it wasn't too big of a deal. I think it surpassed $100 million, if I remember correctly. But he's the other qualified hitter who doesn't have a home run yet. We mentioned Jose Abreu. The other one is Andrew Benintendi, with a 77 WRC plus thus far, hitting 264. That's kind of the average, has been the singles of what has been good for him in his career, and kind of always being around that 300 batting average kind of region. And so he's not hitting up to that. He's not getting home runs, not extra base hits. He's just really not hitting well.
Yeah, I remember you told me, because I was not a fan of the Benintendi signing in general, but you told me this is a guy the White Sox need. They've got a lot of guys with high potential that can hit home runs, but they don't have a steady producer, a guy who's always going to go out there and hit 300. And I thought even then, I'm not sure he really fits the White Sox fabric. I don't think he was deserving of the contract that he got. Like, maybe he fit on the team, but the biggest contract they've ever given Alek, that was a little steep for me when you put it in those terms. But it is disappointing extra to see him not even be able to do the things that we were expecting him to do, which is hit 300, be a above league average hitter. Right now 77 WRC plus is just not going to cut it with the kind of contract that he's on. He's that other qualified hitter that has not hit the home run yet. So it's him and Abreu, one White Sox who left for Houston and one guy who just joined the White Sox. Both have not homered yet, but with Benintendi this year, since he's not hitting the ball hard, you have the hard hit rate and barrel rate that are both under the 10th percentile. They believe one is in the 5th percentile, one's in the 7th. So for a guy that, he's always kind of had the magic in his bat, he's able to hit singles, hit doubles, hit triples, maybe not as many home runs as you would like, but he's always been able to find the soft spots in the defense, hit it hard through the hole. This time he's not hitting it hard, he's not hitting it through the hole, and he's just not getting it on base enough for a White Sox team that's been maybe one of the most disappointing teams in the league in general this year.
Absolutely. The White Sox have been god awful so far. But
were you gonna say, like, that you believe me now when I told you shouldn't have bid on the White Sox again?
Well, I mean, I wasn't in on the White Sox as much as last year.
You had them in the World Series last year, as did I. So
I did.
It would have been hard to be more in the White Sox.
When I tell you I was this close to having them make the playoffs again this year, so I have them out. So the record's looking like it's not going to be where I had them still. I think they were the first or second team out in the American League for me. But back to Benintendi, the guy who, when you're saying that they needed a more consistent hitter, and he hasn't even been that. And I even said the White Sox were a team that struggled with defense, and Benintendi's a former Gold Glove Award winner, and even that's not really there. And it was kind of a little bit like that in the past, but he's been below average defender at best this season so far. And so the things that at least I thought the White Sox were getting, and I'm sure the White Sox thought they were getting as well, both the consistent bat and consistent glove have not been there for him.
Yeah, we'll move on to a player that was on the fringe of making this list, but we figured we have to include him considering all that happened this offseason, the amount of money that he's making. And that's Carlos Correa, who was a Giant, then he was a Met, but he ended up with the Twins, and he is not having the greatest season so far. I mean, as we all know, the big contract after all the drama that went on, but he's just not been all that great this year. 84 WRC plus, hitting just 200. And this is after having a pretty strong week this past week. So these numbers just 7 days ago were a lot worse. I think he had a homer and 4 doubles this past week in a couple series. I think they played the Cubs, and he played pretty well at the end of the series. But these numbers used to be a lot worse. The fans in Minnesota were booing him at one point, and he said he didn't even blame them because he was hitting so poorly. So Carlos Correa, a guy that almost got his way off this list with his performance this week, but just overall, if you're talking about the whole season so far, quarter of the year, he's been one of the more disappointing players in the MLB.
He flew under the radar in terms of how disappointing he was a little bit. And I'm sure that would not have flown in with the Giants or the Mets if he got the contract there. But in the Twins, it's been maybe good for him so far. You mentioned they're still booing him, and so he's really not performing. And for a team that's in first in the division, a little bit different than the other teams that we've mentioned having disappointing players. If he was getting production, the Twins are still in first place, and you imagine the Twins would have loved to have his production, because then they could maybe be building a steady lead in the division right now. They're still at the top. Just talked about the White Sox, who thought to maybe be one of those teams up towards the top with a chance to win it in a weaker AL Central. They're not going to be there. So really, it's just going to be the Twins and the Guardians. And if you're the Twins, you still like where you're at, even without Correa's bat, because obviously you'd love to have him in there and building up a lead. But if Correa's going to be slumping, you got to figure the guy you gave that massive contract to isn't going to be slumping the entire season. It's not going to be a bad contract. At least we don't think. He's been consistent for so long. So you like where you're at if you're the Twins, with Correa disappointing and still being in first place in the division.
Yeah, they've gotten Joey Gallo, they've gotten some of these other guys that are hitting the crap out of the ball, and you just wish that Carlos Correa could be in that group as well. He's still playing pretty solid defense. He's still hitting the ball hard. It's just a matter of time of stacking the days and the series and the weeks where he is above average hitter, and you do worry about the injuries at some point. But if he can stay on the field, if he can stay hitting the ball hard, playing good defense, and as this Twins team kind of gets into the pennant race, that's time where we really see Carlos Correa shine. And if we get him in the postseason, we know how much of a leader and a big talent he is in the postseason. So excited to see what Carlos Correa can do as the season draws on. But I do think he'll bounce back a little bit more, and we've already started to see it for a week, but just had to work his way on the list.
I think he's too good not to. It's a guy, at least for me, I'd love to see him struggle. Just that, frankly, but it's someone who's too good not to, and I think we're going to see it. Like you said, we've started to see it. So, guy the Twins would love to have back to his normal production soon, and we believe he will be.
Yeah, let me get through these next couple. These are players that maybe didn't have the highest expectations, but still have been disappointing this year. It's Andres Gimenez to start it off for the Cleveland Guardians. A team that is trailing the Minnesota Twins despite winning the AL Central last year. They're not in the lead right now, and Gimenez is one of the reasons why he was an all-star last year, received MVP votes at the end of the year because he was a big rising star, signed a 7-year deal in the offseason. He's been struggling to open the year so far this year as well. .231 batting average, an OBP below 300, a slug at just 366 with an 84 WRC+. He's supposed to be that player that, he hits for average, he can get on base, he plays great defense, has a high WAR, but this season has been pretty disappointing.
Yeah, it has been for sure, and he was a rising star, and I had him in fantasy last year. He was almost one of my keepers, so I believed in him. Defensively, he's still been solid, but offensively, the numbers, like we mentioned, just have not been there, and he's just part of the reason that the Guardians are struggling and under 500 behind those Twins right now that we just talked about. So Andres Gimenez, it's disappointing across the board. The slugs out there, the averages in there, just overall a disappointment for me at least. And I think he's a guy that also seems like he's gonna turn around at some point. At least I hope so, and the Guardians are gonna need it.
Yeah, let's go to another AL Central player. I feel like we've got a lot of AL Central players on this list, but Lance Lynn, a guy who has the highest ERA among all qualified starters in the league, and he was my dark horse for the American League Cy Young. Had a really great stretch down the end of the season last year after he came back from injury. But this season, a 7.51 ERA and 44 and a third innings pitched, giving up over 2 home runs a game for the 5th worst home runs per 9 among all starters in Major League Baseball. Just has not been able to figure it out this season. Been really disappointing.
It has been. And another White Sox, like you said earlier, the entire White Sox have been struggling. And I feel like we need to do a segment saying like players we were right on at this point, because obviously if they're going to be disappointed to us, we thought they'd be good, and keep mentioning we thought this guy was going to be this and this and this. So we seem horrible right now. So
well, I mean, everyone kind of thought Carlos Correa would be good. Everyone thought Alek Manoah would be good. Lance Lynn's maybe one that was a little bit more on the fringe, where I think I was maybe higher on him than most, and so this was a guy that for me he had to end up on the list. But I don't think everyone was as high on Lance Lynn, so we don't miss on everyone. Just, I guess, our dark horse picks. Not for National League Rookie of the Year, though. James Outman's having a pretty good start to the season. But, yeah, Lynn, the third highest batting average on balls in play for all qualified pitchers. That's, hitters, when they put the ball in play, have the highest batting average. So sometimes, if that's a little high, you can think that maybe the pitcher's getting a little bit unlucky. He's got 3.86 FIP, so maybe he is getting a little unlucky with the White Sox defense. There are some things in play. Maybe the home run rate comes down. The BABIP, you would assume, is going to come down to a more normal level. And if the fielding's better, he get better results. But still, a 7.51 ERA. It's hard to pitch to that tune without having a slow start to the year. So as much as I would hope that Lance Lynn can turn it around with all the strikeout stuff he has, I think still striking out just barely under 11 batters per 9 innings, which is an elite number. I just don't know if he can turn it around with the White Sox team behind him as we continue to go through this year.
Yeah, and, we can talk about the expected stats all day long, the FIP, the expected ERA, but bottom line, sometimes it just doesn't work out for you, and you're still going to be expected to put results on. So even if we expect him to kind of positively regress a little bit, Lance Lynn's definitely been a disappointment, at least his numbers so far that he's produced. And moving on, another American League player. This one's George Springer of the Blue Jays, another Blue Jay that we talked about. We talked about Manoah a little bit earlier. And now Springer, who has been bottom 10 in WRC plus among qualified hitters at 67 with a negative .4 WAR, and really just not getting it done.
Yeah, this one's, I think, one of the more debatable players on this list because he is getting unlucky. He's got a big discrepancy between his WOBA and his ex-WOBA. It's weighted on base average for those who don't really follow the analytics stats, but his WOBA is 267, his ex-WOBA is 325, which means he should be getting on base a lot more. He's still hitting the ball hard, 98th percentile in max exit velocity. Good plate discipline. I mean, his expected batting average is 30 points higher than his regular batting average. His expected slug is over 100 points higher than his regular slug. So he's one of those guys you look at, could be getting unlucky, and he's still at the top of that Blue Jays offense. So I think of all the players on this list, he's probably the one I'm most confident he can turn it around. And maybe, one of the top at least of these 10. But you're right, he just has not been getting it done. And what's interesting to me is you have two Blue Jays on this list, and yet they just took a series from the Atlanta Braves, and they're still playing very well in the AL.
And sometimes that's just baseball. Sometimes you get unlucky, and that's kind of what's so beautiful about the sport. You can hit the ball hard and still get out. And
not sure George Springer thinks that's very beautiful, but yeah,
it's not. And that's the time as a hitter where you just have to kind of trust the process and understand that what I'm doing is right. I'm still hitting the ball hard. And so that's what he needs to just keep doing, stick to what he's doing. And you mentioned if the expected numbers, think he should be doing a little bit better. 9 times out of 10, we see that be true over a course of 162 seasons. So if he keeps doing what he's doing, not make it everything too complicated, not switch things up, we should see a positive regression.
Yeah, the last player on this list is one we felt we had to include, but you'll get into it in a second. It's Sandy Alcantara, the reigning National League Cy Young winner for the Miami Marlins. Across 8 starts so far, he's got a 4.91 ERA, 51 in the third innings pitch. So he's still going deep into games, but as you pointed out here, might be his downfall this season.
And this is the one player who's probably been the least disappointing, maybe overall numbers wise. The Cy Young winner pitching to a 4.91 ERA is disappointing, but his bread and butter, which was going deep into games, like you mentioned, has been his downfall so far. 20 of his 28 earned runs allowed have been in the third and fourth time through the order. So he's been elite the first 2 times through the order. And then as he starts to get deep into games, which is what he was so good at last year, he only allowed 27 earned runs in the third or fourth time through the order all season last season. He's already at 20 thus far into the year. It's really been the reason that he's been disappointing, at least for me. A guy that seemed to go 8 or 9 innings, 1 run or shutout every time he pitched last season, and that's how he won the Cy Young Award. So for when he's not able to do that, whether it's the manager and the coaching staff should be kind of pulling him out a little bit earlier, or if he's just whatever it is, he threw the most innings of his career last season. So do you think last season was a fluke, kind of him being able to be so dominant late into games, or you think it's more of kind of fatigue a little bit and kind of just figuring it out?
I don't think it's a fluke, but I do think that we're not going to see him have the amount of volume he had last year with the amount of efficiency as well. You don't really see that from a pitcher. There's sometimes two sides of it. I mean, you look at a guy like Garrett Cole, those are a lot of innings, but when you throw them in innings, it's sometimes easier to give up home runs the third time through the lineup or give up runs the fourth time through the order. You have a guy last year like Spencer Strider, super efficient, but didn't throw that many innings. And when you only go 5 innings to start, the opposing offense maybe sees you 2, sometimes 3 times. A little bit easier to pitch that way. And somehow Sandy Alcantara last season did all the innings and still had an ERA in the low 2s. So I'm not sure we're going to see that from him again, at least this year. But I don't think it's a fluke, I guess. I just think that, this season you get tagged for a couple runs and your ERA balloons up a little bit. But I think over the course of the season, he's still going to finish with a respectable ERA. You're going to get the volume from Sandy Alcantara. Maybe he's not going to be, the unanimous Cy Young or anything like that, but I do think that he's going to go back to being one of the best starters in the league. And I still think he has been. The stuff's been there. It's just giving up runs in the 8th inning, something that not other pitchers have a chance to do, is just something he's doing so far this season.
And let us know what other players you thought were disappointing, what players are going to turn it around in these disappointing players, and we'll respond to all those comments down below. And so we're hoping these guys can definitely turn it around going forward.
Thank you so much for tuning into this video. If you enjoyed it, make sure to give us a like, leave a subscribe, and hit the notification bell as well. You can follow us on all of our social media pages, as well as check out these videos around me for other content from our show.